Okay, so welcome to this last video. I think it's going to be the last video anyway of the playlist where I'm looking at making these little skull and crossbone charms. Um, so I've now added the lobster claws and the metal loops here to both of my skull and crossbones, and I'm going to be soldering that metal loop closed. Again, it's not quite focusing, but the idea is that the moment if I pulled on this, that metal loop would open very, very easily. I want to just put a little piece of solder across there, which is going to seal it. Okay, so what is solder? This is solder right here. Basically, its majority, I think it's about 60%. Slightly more tin, and then there's other metals in here to make an alloy. It used to have lead in there, but now lead's been replaced by zinc, bismuth, I think, or indium. Anyway, there's all sorts of different variations, but majority of this is just tin, and it has a melting point of roughly about 230, 240 degrees Celsius, if I'm not mistaken. So to heat this and melt it to be able to seal these little loops, I've got a soldering setup here. So this consists of a soldering iron in a soldering stand. In the soldering stand, I've got a damp sponge there, so you need to take that sponge out. If it's not damp, you need to take it to the sink, run it under cold water like you would do a normal cleaning sponge, and then squeeze most of the water out so it doesn't drip everywhere. This soldering iron obviously is going to get very, very hot, as is the soldering stand, so I must always be careful when I'm doing this, and you might want to wear gloves. As long as you're careful, you should be fine. I've got a third hand here which should have two crocodile clips for holding components. In this case I only need one, so I'm not going to worry about it, but that's not good, is it? I'm a bit peeved about that. There's a magnifying glass there for fine detail work, but we won't need it, and I've got it in a position here where it's going to give me a little bit more stability with that base. This is an extraction fan with a carbon filter. It's just to remove any fumes. The fumes aren't dangerous, they're just not very nice. And then here I've got the transformer for my soldering iron. Now you can see here that this currently has, oh, that's good, okay, it's just gone into standby. It did have a temperature there of 330 degrees Celsius, which is much higher than you need to actually melt solder, but I tend to find with a higher temperature we can heat the metal and the solder a lot faster, and it's basically easier to work with. So that's why I've got the temperature set here to 333. I just find 333 a nice easy number to remember. It could be 300, it could be 330. I go 333. Now at the moment the temperature is dropping, and the reason for that is because it's going into standby mode. So after about 5 minutes of no activity, this transformer will actually reduce the temperature of the tip here down to 180, and that's to protect the tip and stop the tip of the soldering iron here from getting damaged. So at the moment that is dropping down, and now I won't be able to solder anymore. That's 240 degrees Celsius, so it's really at the limit of my ability to use this to solder. And what I need to do to reactivate it back to the full temperature, reactivate that transformer, is to apply a heat difference basically to the tip. So if I just rub that soldering iron against the sponge here, what it's doing is it's reducing the temperature of that tip. The problem is it was up, and there you go. So I didn't want to show that really. I wanted to show the fact that when it was in standby, it kind of hovered around 180, and then when I put it against the sponge, it acts like a heat sink. It draws the heat away, and when it detects that temperature change, it reactivates the transformer. Okay, it did it straight away. The annoying thing is it has to drop to 180 before you can reactivate it. So anyway, there you go. Now it's going back up to 333, and when it's at full temperature, I'll be good to go. I hope that made sense. That felt very, very waffly. Anyway, let's see. Let's see if I can actually solder these little loops together. So what I want to do here is I'm going to make sure that the opening, and again my camera here probably isn't going to focus. I want to make sure the opening there in that loop is right at the top. I don't know whether you can see that there. There's the little opening. It's not quite focusing, but I'm going to hold that in the crocodile clip here, and it's always a problem this because the crocodile clip and the pewter is going to draw the heat away and stop me from being able to heat that metal claw easily, that metal loop. I also need to make sure that the pewter as well is far enough away from the heat, because this tip of the soldering iron will melt the pewter. Okay, now here's my solder. Rather than working with the whole reel, what I'm going to do here is just pull a bit off. It's very, very soft, very, very malleable. I'm going to wrap this around my fingers so it's a little bit more easy to work with. And then now I've got this like as a little easy grab coil. Okay, my soldering iron is at 333 degrees Celsius. Clean the tip a little bit. I'm going to apply, I need to make sure my soldering iron is shiny. And can you see here, this has actually got damaged a little bit over time, so that's matte. If I turn that round, this side is shiny. So I need to apply a little bit of solder here to my tip, and you can perhaps see the gases coming off there and being drawn away by the extraction fan. I want to make sure my cable's not in the way. It's a bit cluttered here. Normally I'd have a bit more space, but for the camera I'm trying to do it in this small space. And then now I'm going to hold the soldering iron tip against that metal loop, wait for a few seconds, and then I'm going to apply solder to the join. And what I'm trying to do, and I think that was a great job, I'm just trying to fill the gap in the metal loop there with solder. I think that was a really good job. So let's do a see very carefully without catching my hand on the soldering iron stand. I'm going to draw that away, and I think the proof here is going to be to basically get those thin nose pliers again and try and pull this apart and see what happens. Okay, so here goes. Let's test this. I want to try and make sure that the gap that I've just soldered closed is at the top here. I'm going to get those two thin nose pliers, grab this, and now when I pull on this, yeah, that feels pretty solid. In fact, thinking about it, I could have just pulled on here, couldn't I? If I pull on there, that feels pretty good. I'm really happy with that. That seems to have done a great job of bonding the opening and that loop together. Okay, now I'm going to do this one again, this other one should I say, and that first attempt went really rather nicely. It doesn't always go that smoothly. Sometimes you get a little blob of solder on the loop. So let's just see what happens with this second attempt. Okay, clean the tip, make sure I've got a clean end of the tip here. Okay, again a bit cramped on space, try and make sure you've got more space to work with. Put a bit of solder on the tip there, then apply the tip to where you want to solder the metal loop together, where the gap is. Apply a little bit of solder, and yeah, this one there's a little element of solder just catching on the side there. I'm just going to try and heat it up and just kind of smooth that away. And again, that looks great. It cools down super fast on the actual loop here because there's very little kind of volume of metal here. There's very little heat capacitance, and so the heat is drawn away quickly. That one's not quite so neat. I don't know whether you can see there, but that again is super tough. In fact, I'm just going to clip these little dudes together now and just pull them both as a final test. What is going to happen here? There you go. And that's pretty cool, I have to say. That's awesome. So that is ready for me to attach onto whatever I want to attach it to. Like, for example, my keys. That looks pretty awesome. Okay, finally got there. I hope that was useful.